Hello, hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yanique Hume, and welcome everyone here in the region and further afield. Welcome to the inaugural Catapult Lockdown Virtual Salon. This afternoon, we'll be in discussion with Jonathan Van Arneman from St. Maarten. But before we begin, I'd like to express huge thanks to the Catapult partners, including the American Friends of Jamaica, Kingston Creative, and Fresh Milk for making our encounter here this afternoon a reality. Many thanks to you. And before I introduce Jonathan, I just want to say to you, please feel free to ask questions, which we'll get a chance to answer in the Q&A period that will follow. We'll have about 15, 20 minutes to do so. But today we have our first creative, our first artist who's joining us in this encounter, in this encuentro, Jonathan Van Arneman from St. Maarten. And he is a young dancer, choreographer, teacher, who worked primarily in St. Maarten and studied also in the United States with various movers, various dancers, various choreographers there. He's now returned to St. Maarten, where he's working at the National Institute for the Arts. And so today we're going to be talking about some of his experiences, both at home and abroad. So welcome, Jonathan. Welcome to our first encounter this afternoon.
Hi, thank you. Thank you. Very excited to be here.
Oh, it's so wonderful to see you and to have you here with us today and to begin our conversation. So I see this as a dialogue in motion, right? So as we move through the different kind of moments in your own trajectory as an artist, as a creative, working at home and working abroad. But I want you, St. Maarten doesn't always enter our imaginary when we think about the Caribbean. It doesn't always, it's there, but it doesn't always enter in the way as some of the larger islands, perhaps. And it has a very interesting history. So I want to begin to talk about what I would call the persistence of coloniality within the space of St. Maarten. And what does that do to an artist like yourself and other artists in terms of the creative production that is possible, especially in a space where you have two colonial ties, both the Dutch and the French. So if you could just start us off by there, introducing your island nation and talking a bit about that.
Sure. So I am from St. Maarten. I reside on the Dutch side. And St. Maarten, as you said, it has a very unique history, especially when compared to different Caribbean islands. So St. Maarten is not independent. St. Maarten, the Dutch side is autonomous, but it is still under the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and the French side is regarded as an overseas territory of France. And so even in that, there's differences in the way that the French side relates to France and the Dutch side relates to the Netherlands. And in recent years, we've seen that the French side has been more aligned with France in the sense that they're less facing the Dutch side, and so there's less collaboration, and that's been the source of a lot of tension on the island. So just a little bit of a backdrop. St. Maarten.
So it's like an invisible line then, in terms of the two.
Yeah. So I mean, we say it's I mean, we say the Dutch side, we say the French side, but honestly, like for as long as St. Maarten has existed, it's always been one island. It's always been one people. There are family ties that go across. There are relationships that go across. There's fathers that live on the French side. Their kids are on the Dutch side. Their wives are on the Dutch side. There's people who live and work on different sides. People who go to school on different sides. So I mean, it's very, very integrated. And so this idea of separation is more to do with colonialism than to do with the actual on the ground behavior of the people. And it's been like that since the beginning, actually. So St. Maarten was colonized by the Dutch and the French. And I mean, St. Maarten has passed hands between the Dutch and the French and the British and the Spanish and, like the history of colonialism. But if you look at the ties, it's always existed because actually some of the enslavers on the Dutch side were also enslavers on the French side, and so you have this persistence on both sides of both being oppressed by the same folks, essentially.
Right.
And then when you have the abolition of slavery on the French side in 1848, the Dutch didn't abolish slavery until 1863. And so technically there was a 15-year period between the French side and the Dutch side where you could be enslaved on one side and free on the other side. And so
Wow.
what that
Wow.
led to, which is crazy, right? Because
Yeah.
the island is
I'm booking
37
it over
square
there.
miles. It is 37 square miles. So
Wow.
it's a tiny space. And so because of that, there was actually a de facto emancipation on the Dutch side. And so shortly after the French side abolished slavery, the folks on the Dutch side, they had to also not officially abolish slavery, but treat people as if they were free, because if
Right.
not, it
Exactly.
would have been chaos.
Chaos.
And so there's always been this intermingling between the French side and the Dutch side. But I mean, again, there is still a French side and a Dutch side. So the
Right.
colonialism still persists, and I think that that detracts from what a nation is able to do in terms of nation building. And I mean, I
Yeah.
think we'll get a little bit more into nation building
Yeah, for
later.
sure, for sure, for sure. I mean, I do. There's an interesting thing here as you're speaking in terms of there's a kind of cultural intimacy, notwithstanding the political divide, right? So the political divide almost seems rather arbitrary. So I'm curious, when we think about the Caribbean as a kind of crossroads culture, a crucible of world cultures, St. Martin represents a really unique microcosm of this mixture. How does this enter into or hinder or present opportunities in terms of what it means as source material for creating works of art for you?
Sure. So St. Martin, in a lot of cases, is regarded as a melting pot, right?
Mm.
And that's kind of like the draw in, but it's actually a case of erasure in some
Mm.
senses, because what happened was, after the abolition of slavery, the industries on the island slowly started to decline, and so we were known for really a strong sugar industry and rum and salt, and those industries slowly started to decline. So St. Martin became an island of subsistence up until the 80s and 90s, where there's this huge boom of tourism on both the
Right.
Dutch side and the French side. First on the Dutch side, and then later on the French side. And you have this influx of tons and tons of folks coming from different Caribbean islands and different places all over the world to work in the tourism industry on the island. And so what ended up happening was the indigenous population, the local population on the island, is actually now a minority, because there were
Mm.
so many folks who came in. And of course, legislation is not keeping up with that. So in terms of thinking of, okay, like St. Martin as a place, like what are we doing to preserve certain local customs and local practices? That's often left up to, the informal economy, because it's just like, you're not going to formalize something like that, because it's usually just the locals just carry it out because that's their culture. But now when
Right.
that local culture is being challenged by so many other different cultures, to a sense where it's a minority, if that is not established, if that is not codified, it's going to be erased, right?
Yes. Yes.
And
Indeed.
so
Indeed.
so all of that is happening on St. Martin. And I mean, like, again, it is not this is not me making a case of xenophobia. And I think that there needs to be that distinction. It's like
Mhm.
there's a difference between xenophobia and erasure of indigeneity.
Interesting. Yeah.
Because xenophobia is oftentimes rooted in the myth of erasure, but then there's the actual erasure that's
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned, I mean, this idea of erasure and the national becomes very interesting. In our preliminary conversations, we were talking about other sites in the Caribbean in which the folk became the source material for creating a kind of national language
Hmm.
through dance, a vernacular expression and movement. We talked about the processes, for example, or the developments in Haiti in the 40s, probably a bit earlier than that, even in the 30s, and with the indigenous movement and the creation of this national aesthetic and movement using the movement vocabulary from Vodun. And we see that within Jamaica in the 1960s with the development of the National Dance Theatre Company. We see this in places like Cuba as well with the development of the Cuban modern dance technique. So this, it really presents an interesting case where when the folk that you're trying to resuscitate, if you will, or that you're hoping could be the source material for creation are in a minority. But do you see any opportunities with the various other cultural and ethnic and racial groups and communities present on the island in terms of creating something that isn't necessarily, that is more porous in its understanding of nationalism? Do you see that space for creation of borrowing, of pulling together from these different sources that are present on the island now, especially since the indigenous population is in decline, indigenous being its native population?
Yes, I think you mentioned a number of really interesting things. And so I do want to say that there is a push towards the codification of our national dance, which is, it's relatively recent if you look at it. This happened in 1988. That's when they started doing interviews with elders and trying to figure out so the Panam is a dance of emancipation. It's a dance of the Panam. The Panam is the national dance of St. Maarten, and it's emancipatory. It came out of emancipation. And so the work that's being done on the Panam happened a lot in the late 80s, and then later with the iconic Clara Reyes. She did her thesis on the Panam, and so a lot of her research is what we are building on with the Panam. And so she really was institutional to codifying it and to making sure that it's not just oh, this is from the Panam, or this is from the Panam, and it becomes like this just like hodgepodge of stuff. Like she really wanted to have it. Yeah, she wanted to institutionalize it. Like, okay, these are the steps. This is where this comes from. This is where this comes from. So there is that happening. There is that recovery and reclamation of Saint Maarten, because that is Saint Maarten. That is core indigenous. That is what we have. We have the Panam. So there is that happening. But then at the same time that's happening, there is a lot of borrowing. There is a lot of amalgamation of different customs and cultures coming together, and you see that a lot in our music. In our music, it's not uncommon to hear instruments from different parts of the Caribbean, to hear papiamento, English, French, Spanish, Creole, all of that in one St. Maarten song. And everybody knows what it's talking about. So it is definitely becoming common. Like when you go to a party and it's as common to hear zouk as it is to hear bachata, as it is to hear soca, as it is to hear, and so there are definitely these forces coming together, and it's beautiful. Don't get me wrong, it's beautiful, and I love that about St. Maarten because it's so unique in that sense. But it cannot be at the expense of the indigenous culture that's being lost. So it needs to happen hand in hand.
That balance.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. I want to turn now, Jonathan, to your specific journey as a creator, as a dancer, and getting to that place in your own training at home and recognizing, okay, I need to go further afield. Can you talk to us about that trajectory, that journey to the United States, and who you were influenced by in that moment? I believe in Minnesota, of all places, lovely, cold, but kind of was like a polar opposite to St. Maarten, no? But if you could tell me about that particular journey, what led you there, and who were some of the dancers you had an opportunity to work with and train with?
Sure. So right out of St. Maarten, so I did my primary school and my high school in St. Maarten, and actually wasn't very involved in dance while I was on St. Maarten. I was involved in capoeira, and so I always regard capoeira as my introduction to dance. That was kind of my springboard for jumping off into other dance fields.
Oh, beautiful. Beautiful that you mentioned that in terms of the kind of innate
Mm-hmm.
uh, uh, quality of dance that is within the martial arts, especially the Afro martial arts form like capoeira. Yeah. So.
Yeah,
Mm,
yeah, and
mhm,
just thinking about like capoeira, I think taught me it taught me flow. It taught me how to really just give into the body without really, thinking. Because when you're in the
the
hora,
roda.
and you're you're playing against someone else, and it's like you can't really think, you just have to go. It has to be a constant flow of movement, a constant conversation, a constant giving and taking, and I feel like that
Exactly.
has definitely been included in the other dances that I later on learned.
Mhm.
um, so I'm always going to be grateful for capoeira as my springboard. And I still do practice capoeira. Um, and so when I left, I first spent 2 years in Canada, and then I went to the US. And in the US, I was the type of person, it's like once I got into dance, any dance class that was available for me, that's the dance I would take.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
It
yeah.
didn't matter what it was. And so I was all over the place. I was in modern, I was in contemporary. I really, really connected to my West African dance teacher in college, Sister Patricia Brown, and she taught me so much from the
Mm.
way that not only in terms of movement and movement quality. um, she she would always tell me, "You are so big, you are so long, you have such a vast facility. You need to use your body." And I can
Mhm.
hear her
You can
voice in
hear
my
her voice,
head.
huh? Yes,
I'm
yes.
just like, what is she talking about? Like, what is she
Yeah.
saying? Like I hear what she's saying, but like I don't know how to use that information until one day it just clicked, and then I was just like, oh, like it dropped in. And so the fact that she was willing to really invest in me before I was any kind of dancer, like she was just really willing to pour into me. That means so much, and the way that she conducted the space, from that space I really took a sense of family, a sense of unity, and a
Oh,
sense of
wonderful.
solidarity. It was definitely a very safe space for me in a predominantly white college. It's in Minnesota. And so it was beautiful. And so from there I later trained with Jinan Saint Just. So
Mhm.
yes, she has a
Yeah, a
company called
Haitian too.
Afutai. She's Haitian. Her
Mhm.
mom, Florencia Pierre,
Yes.
iconic Haitian woman,
Yes.
very influential in the arts. Also a Vodun priestess. And her brother Jeff Pierre, who plays the drums, and just a very amazing family that
Indeed,
yeah,
indeed.
it became a family art, and being a part of that space really showed me the importance of lineage, the importance of heritage, and also with the dances that they taught, and with traditional Haitian dance, every single dance has a place and a purpose. It's like
Mhm.
if you're doing Nago, then it's here. This is what Nago was created for. If you're doing Igbo, it's here. If you're doing
Here,
Petbo, if
exactly.
you're doing Congo, it's like
Yeah,
everything was like created with a very specific idea in mind. And when you dance that, you are embodying that, and you are
right.
allowing that energy to then
Yeah.
possess you. And
So
so
you're kind of embodying that scriptive narrative of
yes,
history, of locality, of geography, of all of that.
of
Wonderful.
all of those things. And
All
it
of
was
it.
it was beautiful for me as a
Mhm.
Caribbean body to then be introduced to this in Minnesota, of all places.
Yeah, yeah.
And really have that awakening, I guess you could say. And it was just I'm forever grateful for my experiences in that space with Afutai. And then I would say the third super influential space that I was able to be a part of was Ananya Dance Theater.
Mhm.
I was a part of that company for 2 years, and that was completely I want to say foreign to the history of my body. If you think of me as a black man from the Caribbean, um, it's like there's a certain relationship I have with West African dance. There's a certain relationship I have with Haitian dance. But then when it came to Ananya Dance Theater, I was, my
You're on the
footing
outside.
was gone. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I was a visitor. I was a guest in that space. first as a man, because that space was predominantly
Female space.
for, it was for women, and specifically women of color. And it was for them to tell those stories and to use that as healing. Um, and so me being a visitor in that space as a male body, it was definitely an interesting experience because as we were talking yesterday, we were talking about, like, not every story is yours to
It's our
tell.
story to tell, exactly. Yes,
And so
indeed.
I was honored to be able to assist in the telling of certain stories while knowing that I wasn't telling my own story. It's like
Yeah.
it wasn't coming from a personal experience. It was coming from a place of allyship,
Allyship, of gratitude even,
of gratitude. Yes.
yeah, indeed. Oh, beautiful. I'm wondering if we could look at the first image, because I think it's a nice moment to go into that in terms of the work of narrative, or the place of narrative within your own work, and specifically as it relates to your crossing, yeah, and the significance of the Atlantic in your own meditation, movement meditation. So Atlantis 13, one of the pieces you created during your time in Minnesota, bringing together these various strands of influences and bodies and experiences. And I just want you to just take us through this. I mean, there's so much here in this gorgeous image. So a big up to the photographer that captured this piece. And it's like you're cocooned. There's a sense of home, but there's so much movement in this. So what was Atlantis for you, the motivating factor for creating this work? And part one of that question. And part two, what does the Atlantic mean for you?
Sure. So Atlantis 13, that is my baby. That work, I oftentimes just look at the work that I did in Atlantis, and I feel like that's my life's work. Like, I feel like that's my
Well, part
life's
one, you still
purpose.
have a ways to go.
I, exactly. It just keeps on expanding because there's so much to explore. And so, just a little bit of background. I'm working with my co-choreographer for Atlantis 13, Peace Matamutsa. He's from Zimbabwe. We went to school together, and his ideas are just insane. And so it's like you have this guy from the Caribbean and this guy from the continent, and we're coming together and we're creating this work that is for people who are trying to explore their connections to each other as diasporic beings, as folks who are from the continent or from the diaspora. And it's like, okay, like, we understand that there was this rupture that happened, but now what? We are
Yes.
together now. So where do we fall in this long arc of history? And so it was just a beautiful exploration. There was folks in the cast from Nigeria, from Botswana, from the Caribbean, from different parts of the U.S. And it's like all of us have such vastly different relationships to Blackness, um, and the way that we experience our bodies. And so to bring all of those together in one conversation was just beautiful. It was a beautiful experience. And to answer the second part, it's like our relationship to the Atlantic. It's like I grew up on St. Maarten, and half of St. Maarten is covered by the Caribbean Sea, and half of it is covered by the Atlantic Ocean. And so I grew up seeing the Atlantic Ocean, almost every day. That is a constant reminder of, like, as I was saying before in our conversation, you can see St. Bart's, you can see Saba, you can see St. Kitts, you can see Anguilla, you see all of these sister islands around you, and you're
Yeah.
reminded of these ties that you have, these connections that you have, connected by the Atlantic, connected by water, but then it's also this reminder of the medium that was used to bring you to the Caribbean, because we were brought here. At the end
Right.
of the day, we were brought here. And so it's like, at the same time that the water and the Atlantic is a source of connection, it's also a source of division, and it's also a source of trauma. And so
Yes.
how do we use that those complexities and those contradictions to make sense of our existence? um,
Indeed.
and I think, that's where the idea of Atlantis, a city submerged by water, it's like we're using that as our grounding point of, okay, now we are submerged by the thing that connects us and divides us. So how are we going to grow from this? How are we going to thrive in this situation? What kind of world are we going to create for ourselves?
Yeah, I like this idea of that submergement, this submerged city, because we all know, well, when many sacred systems from the continent, the African continent, and their development in the broad African diaspora view the Atlantic Ocean as a sacred site, right? We
Mm,
all know it was the thoroughfare through which that passage happened, but it's also the first and the largest cemetery, right? That we
mm,
pay homage to in our rites and in our rituals. And so to think of those ocean dwellers, right? To think of those beings at the
mm,
bottom of the ocean being renewed, because what I see in this work is this idea of renewal. And
mhm,
through renewal, a certain level of reclamation, a reclamation of self, a reclamation of the collective, and this idea of continuity, notwithstanding the rupture, right?
mhm. Yes.
The rupture didn't siphon off completely. That there was the ability to still be in motion and to recreate and to regenerate, right?
Mhm,
And so, if we could see image 5, and with the bodies moving across this space and passage, this notion of passage for you. And if you could relate that then to your journey back home, right?
mhm,
Right. Because it's an interesting, this is a iconic kind of imagery of what we may recall of the experience of that middle passage, of that journey. And I'm wondering if that is what is animating this, or is it a return for you? Is there something else that is happening in this particular piece that we see here?
um yeah, yeah. uh, you definitely gave me a lot to think about just now. I think, in creating Atlantis 13, it was beautiful because we were able to come at it from such different vantage points. But back to what we were saying about St. Maarten, and how St. Maarten has so many different types of people from so many different types of places. I really wanted to explore, like, okay, what if all the dancers are from St. Maarten? That is still incredible diversity within that.
Indeed.
So how do we, who are all from the same place, how do we experience Blackness differently? How do we experience um what it means to be Caribbean, what it means to be unified, what it, like, so this, I love this image, this softness, um this rest.
It's almost like a caressing of each
Yes,
other. Yeah,
yes, and
yeah,
this moment happens in one of the pieces, and it's sandwiched by turmoil. So there's
yeah.
turmoil right before this image, and there's turmoil right afterwards, but there's
Can we see
still.
the image just before this one? I saw image 4 and 3, just to get a sense of that duality that you speak of, that kind of tension. Because this definitely, if we were to map your own journey across these images, it would be interesting to see how you found peace in your own journey of getting to where you are now and what you're doing now. But before we get to that, if you could talk to me about what's here and then linking it to where you are now.
Sure. So this is an explosion, honestly. This is
Yeah.
this is something that's ready to blow. This is for Atlantis 13, we choreographed an uprising on a ship, and this is that moment where it's like everything is about to to pop off, you know. It's like, okay, yeah, you know, everything has been brewing, and then after a while it's just about to go, you know. And so this is that moment of just like, you know, all right, like we're ready to take our liberation, we're ready to do what we have to do, we're ready, you know. And so this compared to that, you know, that softness, that touch, you know, that rest that happens, it's different, but they're both so important. They're such important moments within our trajectory as Caribbean people. And so
But even in this explosive moment, my eyes are drawn to the softness of the wrist. So
mhm,
even in the explosion, the hands remain, there's a certain quality of aliveness, but it's still tender,
mhm,
right? That, you know, that they're, even amidst the struggle and the confrontation and the resistance, the humanity of those who are fighting is still able to be expressed in their bodies. And I see it
yes,
primarily in how you're using the arc of the elbow and the arc
mhm,
of the how the wrist is flowing and how the fingers drape. There's a really beautiful quality here that actually works with the cloth as well, quite well.
mhm,
Um, Gorgeous, gorgeous. So after your time in the United States in Minnesota, it came a moment where home was calling, and
yeah,
and you decided to come back. And how has that return been? Because we know
mhm,
every crossing has the potential for return, you know,
mhm,
and even in that the initial crossing across the Middle Passage, we know people return through trance, people return through their art. So even
mhm,
if physically that sense of return is attenuated by all of these different circumstances that sometimes forestall the actual return,
sure,
um, we know that we return in many ways. But you had an opportunity to, and you had a choice that you've made to return, to have your feet back on the soil in St. Maarten. And how has that return been? And how have it provoked you in another way to continue your work?
sure. So I think this gets back to, you know, what we were talking about earlier in terms of nation building.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I see a lot of the dance practice that I do with the Nia Dance Company as nation building, because, you know, it's taken a life of its own. And what we are doing is we're trying to um, we're we're trying to share the history of what we have been through as people and where we would like to go as people. So for reference, Atlantis Rebirth, that's the show that I'm choreographing with the Nia Dance Company, and that's purely bodies from St. Maarten. And I mean bodies from St. Maarten, but again, St. Maarten has folks from all over, you know, and so there's still folks from all walks of life. And so um, the first half of the show is just a series of different stories, historical stories, where we go through different experiences of Caribbean folks who have been fighting for liberation. And so it starts off with the story of the Garifuna people. So the
Mm.
Garifuna people, just a little bit of history. There was a ship that was full of enslaved bodies who it shipwrecked off the coast of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and these folks found their way onto shore, and they were then integrated into the Carib society. But
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and so but the level at which they were integrated into the society, it wasn't necessarily favorable. There was still a lot of tension, there was still a lot of strife, and so already we see like this butting of heads. And so these folks later escaped to the mountains, and there they met up with Maroons, and they formed their own society, and they used to create raids on Kalinago societies. And so now you have this warring of the indigenous versus the African, right? Um, and so the Kalinago decided to team up with European colonizers to exile the African population to Roatan, which is an island off the coast of Honduras. And so that is the story of the Garifuna people. And so it's like this because that exile happened, there's still so much of their culture that's still intact, their language that's still intact, their dances, their food, and they still tell stories of Saint Vincent, you know.
Yeah, the Punta,
Um,
Euromin, the homeland,
yeah,
Euromin.
exactly, you know. And so I thought it was so important because it's such an interesting story of us as people, you know. It's like this is all of the things that you know, all of the different tensions of Caribbean folks with the indigenous and the African and the European, and just, you know, all of these different factors at play. And then you have this exile, and in so many ways, like, we as Caribbean people have been made to exile certain parts of ourselves. And you know, part of the struggle of being Caribbean is trying to reconcile with what was exiled. You know, it's like, how do we bring together all of these different parts of ourselves that are actually in constant contradiction? You know, it's like we as people are, you know, products of so many different contradictions of colonialism and pillage and slavery and rape, and there's just so much trauma, you know, that is rooted at our existence. And so how do we move forward as people and be whole? um,
Indeed.
and so we start off with that story, and then from there we go into, you know, a story that's on St. Martin, and it's the story of a massacre that happened in St. Martin in 1830. So this is happening against the backdrop of, you know, Haiti becoming the first Black republic in the world. That happens in 1804, and so, you know, St. Martin in 1830 is just like, okay, Haiti is free. Like, what is happening? You know, it's been a minute. You know, why aren't we free? You know, and
Right.
to a point where they just walk off the plantation. They literally walk off the plantation on the French
Wow.
side, and they go to Marigot, and Marigot is the capital on the French side, and they say, you know what, like, we're free.
We're free.
We're not
We're
going to
done.
ask you for our freedom. We took our freedom. We are free. You know, and that's such a powerful moment of not requesting. You know, you're not asking for it. You are demanding. You are letting them know, we're giving you notice. We are free. You know, um, and they were killed for it. They were
Right.
massacred. They were absolutely brutalized. But still, there is still such power in that. You know that.
So, is this part of a history that is silenced, or is it
Yeah. So this is
part of
again.
the popular discourse around, like,
So this
the
is
history that you're taught in St. Martin?
No, so this is very
Mm.
unknown. A lot of folks don't know about this. September 26th was actually the 190th anniversary of this massacre that took place. And
Wow.
it's just, again, St. Martin, as a colonized place, is not really able to institutionalize certain dates and customs and heroes that we would have been able to if we were calling certain shots, you know? And so
So
stuff
what
like
do you
that.
see? So
Mhm.
what do you see your role? Your role is as a dancer, as a choreographer, as an artist, in terms of using movement to fill those gaps and silences, to kind of undo some of the damage and the violence of the archive and of public discourse that annihilates through denial or through erasure. How do you see yourself as an artist and using dance as a medium
Mhm.
to share, to bring those things to the fore? Or is
Um,
it something that you do consciously, or is it
no, that's something that I do very consciously.
okay? Okay.
Very consciously. So, I mean, the first thing is I research for myself, and so I do a lot of self research. I do a lot of reading. I do a lot of investigating and digging and talking because, you know, not everything is written down. The reason I found out about this is because I was having a conversation with Clara, not about
Mm,
that, about something completely different, and then I found out about this.
right.
So again, and then I started researching, and then, you know, and then I'm not going to keep that knowledge to myself. So I bring it to my dancers. We watch documentaries, we watch
Wow.
videos, we read articles, we talk about it. We then create improvs about it. You know, it's like, okay, if you were in this situation, like, what does that look like for you? What would you do? You know, and then we do movement explorations based on that. Um, And so and then from there it's like then we create the I create the choreography, and then we're able to show that, and then that becomes a springboard for conversation in the larger population. It's like, oh, like, did
Oh,
you know this happened? And then and then that again, the dance as nation building, dance as history, dance as archive, dance as memory. um
oh,
all, all of those things are so in in um imperative in the dance practice. And so bringing that critical narrative, that critique, to my work, especially on St. Maarten, is so important for me.
wow. Oh gosh, Jonathan, I could speak to you all day, but I want to give our listeners and those who are tuned in an opportunity to also ask questions that they may have, and then we could continue to dig a little deeper. But thank you for what you've offered so far. So if there's anyone out there that have a question for Jonathan, please feel free to share, and we'll be able to have this opportunity of a broader dialogue with Jonathan here this evening. But before even, okay, here we have one. The notion of Caribbeanness and its complexity, diversity, and unity is such a powerful thing. And I think you encapsulate that quite well, Jonathan. So I wonder, this person is asking, I wonder if Jonathan has had the opportunity to travel much to the other islands within the region as well. So in your own journey and experiences, have you been able to travel to other spaces in the Caribbean?
Yes, I've been. So
What
my
was
mom
Lucia,
is from St.
mother?
Lucia, exactly. So my mom is from St. Lucia. My dad he's born in Aruba. He grew up in Bonaire, and so I also have those histories within my body as well. And so my
Indeed.
whole mom's side is from St. Lucia. I've been to St. Lucia multiple times. I've been to Bonaire. I've been to Curacao, Aruba. Saba, Statia, St. Kitts, St. Bart's, Nevis,
Mm-hmm.
um, Anguilla, Martinique,
Mm-hmm.
like,
Yeah,
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 Barbados.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
I have not been to many of the larger
Larger,
islands,
which
so
is
I
an
have,
interesting thing, and
yeah,
I really, yeah, because you're kind of the
yeah.
inverse of what tends to happen, where the first time off your rock is onto a bigger rock,
Hmm.
but you have kind of this really interesting movement close to home, and then also further afield, and that idea of ties, family ties,
Hmm.
that allows you to move to these different spaces. But I like what you say about carrying those histories in your body. Yeah, that our DNA isn't just in our blood in that kind of way, but it comes out in our muscle memory. It comes
Hmm.
out in what movements we're inspired to do and how we do them. Yes. Any other questions from our audience? So Kay Jadia is asking, how did your previous experiences contribute to your leadership and to your vision and movement in Atlantis 13?
Um, so I would definitely say one thing that we tried to do was to implement certain rituals in our practice. So, for example, we would always start off our rehearsal by joining arms. We'd be in a circle and we'd just breathe together, and then we'd look into each other's eyes, and everyone would say one word about how they feel right now. And so, just this idea of grounding, of focusing, of centering, and then also knowing what other people are bringing into the space. We start and we end every single rehearsal like that, and so
Mm,
that's something that we didn't necessarily do that in other spaces, but I saw the need for it. It's like that experience of other spaces and other people creating solidarity and unity. I was like, okay, how do I create solidarity and unity in my space in my own way? And so we brought that. I want to say I'm talking about me and Peace, because Peace was my co-choreographer for Atlantis 13. Yeah, and then in terms of movement, movement, I've never been a purist. I've never been
mm,
someone who's like, okay, this is modern contemporary, or this is this, or this is that. For me, it's always about what movement is best suited for the story that you're trying to tell. You know, what aesthetic is going to best bring that story across, and then also what movement is in the bodies of the folks that you're working with, you know. And so the combination of those two things always informs the type of work that's created. And I think that gets into the question of, you know, authenticity, and you know, like having folks be true to who they are, and what they bring and what they carry, because that's always going to create for a richer experience for both the dancer and the audience. So I hope that answered the question.
Beautiful, beautiful indeed. Anyone else want to offer comments or questions? So from Patrick, so you left your home in St. Maarten to develop your craft and find yourself through the arts. How has the return home been for you as a cultural practitioner?
Yeah. I mean, it's been amazing in a lot of senses because there's so much going on. Maarten, yes, Maarten is popping, man.
Got a book on flight.
Honestly, St. Maarten, there is so much going on. Folks are really just creating and doing stuff and putting themselves out there. And it's been great to be a part of that development, you know. And I still think there's a long way to go because folks are making something out of nothing, like absolutely nothing.
Sorry to cut you. Is this across all of the disciplines within the arts, or do you find that it's particularly in one area, or is it so it's across the visual arts, music,
visual arts, performing arts,
audiovisual,
music,
film?
you know, the film industry is really taken off too in St. Maarten, and it's great because I mean, again, people are doing this with such few resources. Like St. Maarten doesn't even have a national theater, you know. Like where are we going to show this work, you know? Where are we going to take this professionalism to? And so we're creating this stuff, and then we also have to create the spaces where we show this stuff, you know.
But it also I mean, the same way that you're mentioning about, you know, finding the forms that allow the narratives to come through more authentically, you know, I see more site-specific work then in the absence of a theater.
Yep.
You know, using the spaces that are available to you and telling those stories. So your transition, what I'm hearing is that your transition home has been welcoming, it has been enriching, and you've been able to blossom in this new moment that's happening.
100%, 100%. It's been very warm, very, very warm.
And thanks to those who've laid that groundwork. Clara Reyes, a big hug and big up to you for all the work you've done throughout the years in terms of fighting for dance in St. Maarten, and then, you know, passing on that torch with your work, Jonathan. So we have about 3 more questions. So if those could come in, and then we could begin to come to our end soon enough. Denise Robinson, how was it working? Oh, thank you, Denise, for this question. It was actually one that I had for him yesterday. But how was it working in the feminine healing space? And the fact, and I want to just add on something, the fact that most of your main teachers were women, right? And how was it for you? And how do you interpret that on your own body? But expanding on what Denise is asking here in terms of working in this feminine healing space. Vananda.
Sure. I mean, I was actually very comfortable. It wasn't a space of discomfort for me, and so even though knowing that that the stories and the processes were not necessarily my own, I definitely think that, I don't know, it wasn't a source of agitation or discomfort, or and I mean, you know, growing up, I'm the only boy of 2 sisters, and so I've been surrounded by women my whole life. My best friends have always been women. My, you know, very close to my mom. And so yeah, for me it was it I don't want to say it felt natural, because I feel like that might be pushing it a little bit, but it was I don't know, it just it
Organic.
wasn't, yeah, there wasn't much tension, and again, as a queer body, it's a little bit different coming into a space, but yeah, I would be curious to hear what the women who I shared space with
Yeah, how
say.
they felt. Yeah,
Yeah,
indeed,
yeah,
indeed, indeed, indeed. Because there was something they saw in you to invite
hmm,
you into that space. There's definitely
exactly.
a space of trust, right?
Exactly. And that that
Yeah.
that that idea of invitation is exactly it, because you literally have to be invited into the space. It's not something you can audition for. It's not something that
Mm,
you just show up to. Like, you need to be invited. And so I think that also helps, knowing that they saw something in me that they felt warm towards. Yeah. So
oh, what beautiful recognition.
yeah.
Yeah. We have another two questions before we wrap up. It's from Steffi Gums. Given that we don't learn St. Martin's history in school, do you think that dance could partly play this role for its people?
I'm honestly hoping. I'm hoping, because, I mean, my thing is, I learn stuff and then I teach stuff to my students and to my dancers, and then they teach it to their friends, and then they teach it to their friends, and it expands outward from there. And then also just in making this stuff available. So Atlantis Rebirth, we're planning to do a virtual launch of it, and so it will be available as a digital archive. Like, the work
Nice.
will be available online, so folks can watch it, folks can view it, folks can have conversation about it. And so I really am hoping that it is not for everyone. I don't think everyone is going to take to dance in that sense, but I really hope that it can help with that.
Oh, it's wonderful. Wonderful. Anyone else out there? So from Lena Comilas, did you have any regrets of becoming a dance teacher? I don't know if you use that term, but do you have any regret of becoming a dance teacher?
So this is actually my student, my student asking this question.
I'm like, there's an insider thing here.
Yeah, this is my student asking this question, so I don't think I can say no.
For all teachers, once we inhabit that space of student, we always are teaching and we're always receptive, no? But what about you? What do you consider yourself a teacher in sorts, in terms of what you do and what you impart to your students?
um, I hmm. I would say that, I mean, I love imparting this knowledge to my students. I love it when I see light bulbs go off in their head, like, oh, like, this is that, like, oh, like that, I get it, like, it makes sense. Or like when they're like, what, like, their whole worldview is just like, what, the front side and the Dutch side weren't, free at the same time? What?
Yeah, I was
you
like,
know? Yeah, they were
I
like,
got that moment.
right? They're shocked. They're, because again, no one's ever told that to them before, and they're just like, what? Because they can't even fathom something like that. um
Mm.
and so I do live for those moments. Those are great. Will I be a teacher long term? I don't know about that. Because I definitely see more of my passion in choreography and in research and stuff like that.
But
And,
there's a, mhm. I just
yeah,
want to say there is a way that choreography is pedagogy as
no,
well.
for
Right?
sure, for
So
sure. But it's just, I prefer
yeah,
that
that
pedagogy
right.
to
Than being in the a studio and doing that. Yeah.
exactly. So yeah, I mean, but it's definitely a life lesson. It's something that I'm going to take with me forever. The bond that I have with the students. There's some really great kids on St. Maarten, and also just in terms of my introduction back to the island, being able to work on 2 high schools on the island and seeing it through their eyes, because when I left St. Maarten, I was a high school student. I was 17,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know? And so now
yeah.
that I'm coming back and that's who I'm teaching, it's like, wow, like, okay,
Full circle, huh?
yeah, this is what has happened in 9 years. Okay, I understand, so it has its ups and downs, but no regrets. No,
Yeah,
definitely no regrets, Lena.
wonderful. So I wanted to leave you with if you have any closing remarks, or if you want to leave something with us this afternoon rather, uh, in terms of your vision for the future for St. Martin, for the Caribbean, for this region we love dearly. Is there anything you want to share?
Um, I would say, um, I think something that I've learned and one of my biggest takeaways is that, and I said this recently. I have a podcast where we talk about, different types of history on St. Martin and our relationship to it. So shout out to my Mele co-host. Um,
Mhm.
But one of the things that we talked about is that, nation building is not an accident. This is something that's intentional. This is something that has to be intentional, because if you are not intentionally building your nation, someone else is. And so, especially as colonial subjects, take that as you will, but especially as colonial subjects, it's really important to think about how are we building our nation and what does that look like, and what tools are we equipping the future generations with. Um,
Yeah.
and so that's something I take with me, always in my art practice, in my dance, in the things that I create. What am I doing with my art? What am I doing with my platform? And so, if more people think along those lines of, okay, like nation building, we are building this nation, because Martin is young.
Yeah.
It's so in what senses are we contributing to the furthering of it? Yeah, I think we'd be in a better place. Vision is everything.
Oh, indeed. Indeed. Thank you so much, Jonathan. There's just so much here, such richness in and wisdom in your words and in your vision and in your craft. Thank you for sharing a little piece of yourself with us today, a bit of your ashe, your vital energy and force. Yeah, this is not, so long. This is until we have another encounter, virtually or on land or wherever in the world, hopefully in St. Martin.
Hmm.
And keep on keeping on, keep on shining that light brightly. And we always give thanks to the teachers of whose shoulders we stand. And I'm sure they're so proud of you for what you're doing and what you will continue to do. So before I we turn off today, in closing, I'd just like to express huge thanks again to the Catapult partners, including the American Friends of Jamaica, Kingston Creative, Fresh Milk, for making these series a reality and making them happen. Please remember to tune in again at 4 p.m. Atlantic time this afternoon for my discussion with Trinidadian dancer and cultural practitioner Sonia Dumas. So the conversations continue at 4 p.m. And until then, everyone, walk good, dance brightly, and just have a beautiful day. And we'll see each other again soon. Jonathan, give thanks. Give thanks to you and all the very best what you're doing.
Thank
Okay.
you.
One love all.